My name is Aurora, and at the age of 29, I am, as most people would call me, successful. I have a stable and prestigious job in one of the most respected marketing firms in the city, a stylish and cozy apartment with panoramic windows that overlook the slowly awakening streets in the morning, and in the evenings the flickering lights reflected in the glass facades of neighboring buildings, and enough money to afford a life without worries about tomorrow, with the opportunity to travel, eat in good restaurants, dress in what you like, and not think about when the next salary will come. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. What I don't have anymore is a husband, and to be completely honest, I find it much easier to breathe without him. I divorced David a little over a year ago, after 3 years, which I can only describe in one word now: hell. We met when I was 25, at one of those noisy and seemingly carefree parties where everyone comes hoping for easy communication and a little magic. David immediately stood out from the others. He was charming, could make people laugh, talked with such confidence, as if he knew the answers to all questions, and there was that spark in his eyes that seemed to be able to melt any icy wall of distrust. He assured me that everything in his life was finally falling into place, that past mistakes were behind him, and he was ready for a new stage. 6 months after the beginning of our relationship, we got married. The wedding was beautiful, albeit modest, surrounded by those closest to me, and it seemed to me that a new chapter was beginning, filled with happiness, homely comfort, and the very warmth that I had read about in books and heard from married friends. But almost immediately after the wedding, everything changed. David, as if by a wave of someone's evil will, became different. He began to stay after work more and more often, hanging out with new acquaintances whom I had never seen before. These men were, as they say, bad news. They were constantly drinking, always going around work, discussing some murky schemes and boasting about stupid things that for some reason they considered funny. He returned home late, often tipsy, with empty eyes and a heavy, irritated look. When I tried to talk to him about it, not making a scene, but just asking questions, he got angry, not just annoyed, but frighteningly aggressive. I heard things from him that seemed impossible: humiliations, threats, malicious taunts, said with such coldness that the blood froze in my veins. I tried to find an explanation. I thought maybe he was stressed, maybe his job was pressing, maybe I wasn't paying enough attention. I tried to be supportive, to be there for him, to believe in him. Until that very last night. He came in at 2 in the morning, stumbling, smelling of cheap alcohol, with reddened eyes and tattered clothes. "I got fired," he muttered, falling onto the couch and stretching out his legs as if he were home alone. Something in me is broken. I looked at him and felt the last threads of patience snapping. "That's it, David, I'm filing for divorce. I can't take it anymore. It hurts and scares me." I expected a scandal, maybe tears, pleas, but instead he exploded, as if he was holding back all the rage in the world. He rushed at me with a scream, his face contorted with rage, his eyes glittering with madness. I won't describe the details, because they still come back to me in my nightmares. I ended up exhausted and beaten up, with my breath knocked out and my wrists dislocated, in the bathroom while he was unconscious on the floor. I grabbed my jacket and keys and ran out into the night, my hands shaking as I dialed the number of Vanessa, my friend who lives just a few blocks away. She opened the door in a bathrobe, with her eyes full of anxiety, and immediately understood everything without words. Then there was the police, the hospital, the documents, the court. The divorce passed quickly. He was assigned anger management classes, and he disappeared from my life as suddenly as he appeared. I tried to put myself back together, like a porcelain vase that someone had angrily thrown off the table. My parents, Amerigo and Sandra, and my younger sister Chara supported me as much as they could, and I was sure that I could rely on them. Almost a year has passed, and life has begun to take on the contours of normality. And last month, during a quiet family dinner on the veranda of my parents' house, when the sun was slowly sinking below the horizon, coloring the sky in shades of honey and roses, my mother suddenly said, "How about a vacation? The 4 of us." Somewhere by the sea. Dad cleared his throat, looking down. We were hoping you could help with the tickets and the hotel. These are not the easiest times for us, you know. I didn't think for a second. Their small hardware store is barely breathing. My mother's work in the library does not bring stable income. Kiara, who is always complaining about her administrative salary, lives from payday to payday. On the contrary, I could afford it. I said, "Of course, I'll arrange everything," and I saw my mother clap her hands and smile. I can already imagine swimming in the ocean. So many years have passed since the last vacation. I spent the next 3 weeks worrying. I took time off, booked flights to Miami, found a cozy hotel with spacious rooms, chose a double room for my parents and a single room for Kiara and me, and even bought myself a new swimsuit, which I spent a long time choosing between bright coral and deep blue. I started making a list of restaurants, planning which attractions we could visit. Everything was going according to plan, until a week before the flight, I received a short message from my mother. "We need to talk. Please come to dinner tonight. It's important." Something tightened painfully in my chest. The alarm came instantly, as if an ancient instinct had triggered in me. Is someone sick? Something happened? I immediately replied that I would be at their place after work, and spent the rest of the day absent-mindedly going over the worst-case scenarios in my mind. When I arrived at my parents' modest country house that evening, I was a little surprised to see that not only Mom and Dad were waiting for me in the living room, but also Kiara, my younger sister, who was sitting on the couch with her legs tucked under her, as if preparing for some kind of joyful confession, and literally jumped. There was a wide, even overly enthusiastic smile on her face from impatience, and at that moment I had an uneasy feeling, as if there was something behind this joy that I didn't understand yet. "What's going on?" I asked, looking between my parents and my sister, feeling a surge of excitement in my chest that I couldn't name yet. "Is everything okay?" They looked at each other, as if they had rehearsed this moment in advance, and Dad said with a forced smile, "Let's have dinner first, and then we'll talk," and he led me into the dining room, where, to my considerable surprise, there was my favorite lasagna, baked according to my mother's signature recipe with basil and bechamel sauce, which immediately made me even more wary, because there was an unspoken rule in our family. Favorite dishes usually meant that a difficult or painful conversation would follow at the table. I barely had time to take the first bite when, unable to stand the tension, I asked, "What's the urgent matter you wanted to talk about?" Dad sighed heavily, put his fork on the edge of his plate, and began, "Dear, our vacation plans have changed a bit. We're adding another person." Mom continued his thought without looking at me. "We thought it would be great if Kiara took her fiancé with her," and at that moment Kiara, not hiding her joy, stretched out her left hand to show off a modest but obviously new diamond ring. "I'm engaged," she exclaimed, beaming as if the whole world belonged to her. "And my fiancé is coming to Florida with us." I was stunned and confused for a moment, but when I recovered, I answered, trying to sound sincere, "Oh, congratulations, Kiara. I didn't even know you were dating someone seriously. Who is this lucky guy?" The room suddenly became silent, as if the air in it had become thicker, and my parents exchanged glances again, no longer so confident, and Kiara's smile turned into something smug, even defiant. "Actually, you know him pretty well," she said in the tone one usually uses to share daring secrets. "This is David." The fork slipped out of my hand and clattered onto the porcelain plate. I asked, almost unable to believe my own ears. "You mean, my ex-husband David?" And Kiara nodded, keeping the same unnatural, chilling smile on her face. "We've been dating for 3 months now," she said without a shadow of doubt. "He's changed, Aurora. He's not the man you married anymore." I felt like everything was starting to spin, as if the walls were starting to move and the ceiling was getting too low. My ex-husband, the man who raised a hand against me, the man whose name still caused nightmares in my nights, is now not just around, but is going to become part of my family through marriage to my sister, and the worst part is my parents are sitting at the table and acting like it's just a little bit. It's embarrassing news, not an egregious situation. "You can't be serious," I croaked, feverishly looking at my parents. You know what he did to me, Mom. You were in the courtroom. You heard everything with your own ears. Mom sighed heavily, as if I was giving her trouble again, and said with a hint of annoyance, Aurora, you always exaggerate everything. What happened between you and David was just a typical marital argument that got out of control. I froze, unable to believe what I was hearing, as if the words didn't make sense. A quarrel? Mom, you saw me at the hospital. You've seen the bruises all over my body. How can you call this a quarrel? My father shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable, but said nothing, and Chiara, rolling her eyes as if it were another whim of her older sister, leaned over to me and coldly said, David told me everything. He said that you humiliated him, that you beat him regularly, and that night he was just defending himself. He didn't mean to hurt you. The laughter that burst from my chest was harsh, bitter, almost hysterical. Are you kidding? I weigh 110 pounds, and he weighs 200. How exactly could I beat him up? But Chiara just shrugged and spoke with the same cold confidence. I believe my fiancé. Your fiancé, I repeated, and the words felt like the bitterness of poison on my tongue. The man who threatened me, the man who landed me in the hospital. Dad finally intervened. The past is the past. David takes anger management classes, and now he's sober. People change, Aurora. I pushed the plate of lasagna away, which I could no longer touch, and my appetite disappeared as if it had never existed. I'm not going on vacation with him. This is final, I said, feeling a wave of panic and indignation rise. My parents looked at each other again, and I realized that they hadn't just discussed it all, they'd made the decision without me. Well, Mom began slowly, as if choosing her words, we thought you might think that, and we respect your decision. But we're going anyway, Dad added, we'll just give your ticket to David. Chiara nodded enthusiastically, and we'll meet to rebook the hotel rooms. Instead of 2 single rooms, just book 1 double room for David and me. For a moment, I couldn't speak, because betrayal, so complete, all-consuming, unexpected, whiplash like a blow to naked skin, seemed to rip the air out of me, leaving only pain mixed with a sickening emptiness inside. It was a moment when reality seemed to split into before and after, into that naive world in which I still believed that family was support and protection, and this new, ruthless one, where my own blood preferred my tormentor, a man who left me not only bruises, but also scars. Deeper than the skin, instead of me. They didn't just approve of his presence. They wanted me to give him my ticket, so that I would give up my well-deserved rest, so that he, my abuser, would have fun under palm trees, paid for by me. Let me clarify the situation, I said, and my own voice seemed strange to me, so calm, frighteningly even, as if an ice column had risen inside me, not allowing me to feel anymore. Do you seriously want me to cancel my vacation, for which I have not only already completed all the documents and taken time off, but also spent a lot of nerves and money, and instead allowed my ex-husband, a tyrant who raised his hand against me, to go instead of me? I got up from the table, feeling my fingers tremble slightly, but realizing that this trembling was not from fear, but from pent-up rage and pain, from the desire not to scream, not to burst into tears, not to tear apart the remnants of the illusion that I still carried in myself before this dinner. I grabbed my purse and jacket and abruptly headed for the door, feeling the air in the room become thick and viscous, like a swamp slurry that is so easy to drown in. But none of them even tried to stop me. Neither Chiara, nor my mother, nor my father uttered a word, did not call out, did not make the slightest gesture to detain me. They let me leave, and with that silence they signed their final verdict. The way home passed in a blur, in a kind of blurred, meaningless maelstrom of images and streetlights. I walked as if on autopilot, and I kept waiting for my eyes to fill with tears, for a dam to burst somewhere in my chest and despair to overwhelm me. But instead, an icy, heavy, dense rage grew inside me, not burning, but enveloping, clear as never before. By the time I entered my apartment, took off my shoes, and, without even turning on the light, headed to the kitchen cabinet for a bottle of red wine, I already knew exactly what I was going to do. I poured myself a generous glass, almost to the brim, sat down at my computer, opened the folder with documents and armor, and without hesitating for a second, first canceled all 4 tickets to Miami, then canceled the hotel reservation, from which I had received confirmation and thanks for the early reservation a week before. I took screenshots of all the cancellations, with cancellation labels, stamps and dates, and carefully attached them to 2 separate messages, one to Mom, the other to Kiara. The text was simple and concise, but there was no hint of an apology in it. Vacation plans were canceled. All reservations were made in my name and, accordingly, are now invalid. I wish you a great June. I pressed send without even giving myself time to reconsider or doubt, and with this last action, I felt a strange relief spread through my body. Yes, I'm losing money, and the advance may be part of my pride, but it's nothing compared to letting them enjoy their vacation at my expense, while deleting me like an unnecessary page from a book. Less than 15 minutes later, my phone started vibrating, ringing, and hysterical. At first, my mother had continuous calls, one after the other, then Kiara, then even my father, who usually preferred to remain silent. Without opening the screen, I switched my phone to silent mode and, sipping wine, settled down on the couch, giving myself the right to silence. It wasn't until an hour later, when my emotions had subsided, that I looked at the messages, and what I saw only confirmed me in the correctness of my action. The message from Mom was long, angry, and, most painfully, full of reproaches. How could you do this to your family? You're a terrible daughter, selfish and mean. We'll be better off without you in our lives. Kiara, as always, went even further. You're jealous. You've lost the best man in the world and now you can't bear that he's happy with me. You don't exist for me anymore. You're dead to me. I grinned, not even feeling the pain of those words, just emptiness. Is David the best man in the world? She really has no idea who she's messing with. Oddly enough, I felt relieved when I didn't hesitate to block their numbers. It was symbolic, the end of a long, exhausting stage of my life, when for years I was their emotional, financial, and mental support. I listened to their endless complaints, helped in crises, and comforted them when they needed, forever putting off their needs for later. And so, as soon as I said no, even if it was the first time in years, they immediately threw me overboard as something unnecessary. A week has passed. I received confirmation of an approved vacation at work, but I was in no hurry to make a decision on how to spend it. And so, one lazy evening, lying on the couch, mindlessly scrolling through social media, I came across Kiara's post. The photo showed them all, Mom, Dad, Kiara, and David, standing in front of the luggage against the backdrop of my parents' house, with fake smiles and fake happiness on their faces. Kiara's caption under the photo read, "Went on vacation as a real family. Only important people. No dead weight." Comments from cousins, aunts, and old friends asking, "Where is Aurora? Why is David with you?" I haven't replied to any of these messages. What could I say? My family chose an abuser instead of me. They decided to erase from their memory all the violence that I had to go through. It was too shameful, too painful to explain to someone who wouldn't understand anyway. Instead, I made a decision. I'm not going to sit at home replaying their fake smiles in my memory. I won't give them a single day of my rest. Even if it's cheaper, even if it's in a completely different place, I'll go. I opened the tour operator's website and booked a 2-week trip to Cancun, Mexico. 2 weeks of sun, sand, ocean, and loneliness, which I, as it turned out, deserved for a long time. As the date of my departure approached, I felt a strange, almost unreal mixture of emotions inside me, which intertwined with a throbbing, burn-like anger at those who had known me since childhood and still chose to turn away, an irresistible sadness for what had once seemed unshakable, kinship, childhood memories, a false feeling, security, and, surprisingly, a feeling of unexpected, almost dizzying freedom. There was no longer a need to adjust, to please, to hold back, to protect someone's feelings at the cost of their own. Family obligations, like heavy chains, fell from my shoulders with a dull clang, and for the first time in a long time I felt, now I belong only to myself. On the morning of the flight, with a certain sense of solemnity, I turned off my social networks. Without unnecessary farewells, without explanations, I simply disappeared, like a bird escaping from its cage, and activated an automatic email reply with a short and clear message: on vacation. I'm not getting in touch. It was my decision. My space. My silence. As the plane soared into the sky, leaving the gray airport buildings behind, I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes, not trying to distract myself with a book, a movie, or a conversation with a fellow passenger. I just listened to my heart gradually slow down, as my body, accustomed to constant alertness, begins to let go. It seemed to me that for the first time in many months, or maybe even years, I really allowed myself to relax. All the drama, all the tense, sticky web of events stretching from home, ceased to be a part of my reality. I no longer had to sort it out, explain it, save it. I was on my way to the new shore, literally and symbolically. Mexico turned out to be exactly what I needed. At first glance, there was the hot sun, scorching but gentle, the azure expanse of the ocean caressing the shore with a patient rhythm, snow, white beaches where even the wind seemed soft. I spent my days almost mindlessly exposing my face to the sun, swimming in clear water, drowning in its silence and coolness, as if washing away layers of old pain. In the evenings, I wandered through the Mayan ruins, feeling the breath of antiquity, which did not require explanations and did not ask questions. I ate alone, not out of loneliness, but because I enjoyed my own company, ordered the freshest seafood and drank margaritas, watching the sun go down over the horizon. I hardly touched the phone. No emails, no notifications, just a camera, to keep in mind a particularly beautiful sunset or turquoise sinkhole cenote. The resort was designed exclusively for adults, which created the feeling of a secluded paradise, without the screeching of children, without fuss, without fussy families that would remind me of mine. I made a few casual acquaintances, a courteous couple from Toronto who held mini wine tastings every evening, a tall, slightly thoughtful guy from Australia traveling alone, with whom we once chatted on the beach until almost midnight. But mostly, I kept to myself, as if protecting this quiet space of mine. I read 4 novels, got an even, golden tan, and, what was a real miracle for me, I slept peacefully at night, without nightmares, without screams, without that sticky fear that usually woke me up in the middle of the night. It was only on the way back, when the plane was already preparing to land, that I decided to turn on my phone. As soon as the device connected to the network, it literally exploded with a flood of notifications, messages from unfamiliar numbers, disturbing emails, dozens of missed calls from parents' landline phone, several messages from old friends with concerned signatures. The most recent message came the day before and was from Mom. It read, "Call me as soon as you get this. We have an emergency situation." I was going to ignore him. There were too many lies, manipulations, broken promises. I've almost convinced myself that this is just another trick. Maybe Chiara broke her nail or they need money again. But something, somewhere in the depths of my stomach, a familiar, aching feeling, told me, no, this is something else. After unpacking my suitcase and taking a shower, I dialed the number. Mom answered instantly, without even letting the second ring ring. "Aurora? It's you?" Her voice was trembling, and for the first time in a long time there was neither reproach nor coldness in it, only obvious, genuine excitement. "Yes, Mom." "What's the matter?" Trying to stay calm, I spoke evenly, almost distantly. "Thank God," she breathed. "We've been trying to reach you for days. It's all because of the vacation. And David. I'm not interested in hearing about your wonderful family vacation with my tyrant ex," I replied abruptly and was already reaching to turn off the call. "Wait." Mom raised her voice, and for the first time there was a hint of panic in it. "It was a disaster, Aurora. You were right about him. Something inside me froze. The hand froze. I slowly lowered it. What happened? I asked, and there was something steely in my voice. The story burst out of her like a whirlwind. It turned out that, contrary to what they told me, the vacation was not luxurious and brilliant, as they painted. It was a budget resort somewhere in South Carolina, with peeling facades and a tiny pool. On the first day, according to her, everything was still fine. They spotted each other, had dinner, and even seemed to be laughing. But on the second evening everything went wrong. Kiara felt a headache and returned to the room earlier, while Mom, Dad, and David went to the bar. David went to the bathroom, or so he said. But he didn't come back. More than an hour. His father went to look for him, but he couldn't find him. And when I returned to check on Kiara, I found her in hysterics. David was in their room. With a strange woman. A young, pretty girl, the one who checked them in at the reception. There was a scene. Kiara sobbed, David screamed, insulted her. When his father tried to interfere, he pushed him away, threatening that they should all get out of his way. And then, packing up his things, he left with that woman. He just disappeared. I wasn't surprised, but what surprised me was that they seemed genuinely shocked by what had happened. Well, you got exactly what you signed up for. David has always been David, I said, not trying to hide the irony, which only intensified with each new detail. Mom, lowering her voice, as if she was afraid that even the walls might condemn her for being inattentive, continued, "That's not all." Her words sounded hollow, almost guilty. The next morning, when he and his father, exhausted from a sleepless night, tried to at least put their thoughts in order over a cup of cheap resort coffee, they discovered that thousands of dollars had been debited from their credit cards, and, of course, no one questioned exactly how David got access to their finances. Until my mother sighed and confessed that she and my father still put PIN codes from cards in their wallets, like naive old people, hoping for their own impeccable memory and the integrity of others. David obviously spied them, memorized them, took advantage of a convenient moment and withdrew decent amounts from both cards before disappearing. I couldn't help but chuckle, not because it was really funny, not at all, but rather from an overwhelming sense of the absurdity of what was happening, from that sharp, sarcastic irony that seemed almost literary. "So," I said, barely able to contain my laughter, "are you saying that my ex-husband, the very man you protected so diligently, who you trusted more than me, your daughter, not only betrayed Kiara, but also literally robbed you?" Mom was silent for a moment, and then, in a strangled voice, almost in a whisper, she said, "We're going to sue him for theft." But there was already hesitation in her voice, as if she herself didn't fully believe in the outcome of this venture. Then there was a pause, and I realized that the real reason for the call was coming. Not an apology, not an attempt to make amends, but a request. "We need help. We don't have the money to go home. The banks won't refund the funds until the investigation is over. She faltered, as if she couldn't bring herself to say the obvious. I straightened up, feeling not anger rising inside, but rather an icy, polished calm. "Let me get this straight," I said, enunciating each word carefully, as if I were carving them into stone. "You turned your back on me, you let him do whatever he wanted with me, you called me a liar, you chose my abuser instead of me. And now you want me to help you out?" "We're a family," she whispered, as if those two words were supposed to explain everything, as if they automatically undid everything that had happened. I froze, and then slowly, with the calmness that comes only after months of pain, I replied, "No. We were a family. But you said yourself that I'm dead to you. Don't call me anymore." I didn't let her say a word in response, just disconnected the call and, without hesitation, blocked their numbers. The following days were like a dream in which everything seemed calm, but there was an echo of anxiety in every detail. I received calls from aunts, uncles, family friends, and anyone who felt entitled to remind me of my alleged duty, that family is sacred, that they are suffering, that they need my help. I silently blocked every number. Then they started showing up in person, first at my apartment, where the doorman strictly followed my instructions and wouldn't let them in, then at my office, where the guards escorted them out with professional courtesy. It was exhausting, unpleasant, even awkward, but I held on to my calmness, to my boundary, which I had built with blood and tears. The second time my father tried to break into the office again, Mrs. Mitchell, the security guard, who already knew everything from my explanations, came up to me and asked quietly, "Do you want us to add your family members to the list of people who are banned from entering?" I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and determination. "Yes, please. And thank you for handling this so delicately." I did the same thing in my apartment complex. I went to the concierge and asked him never to let my parents or sister in, regardless of their explanations. It seemed cruel, extreme, but after everything that had happened, I could no longer afford to doubt. They knew no boundaries. They didn't respect either my feelings or my suffering. As time passed, the weeks dragged by, and I heard from fragmentary rumors what was going on with them. Mom and Dad borrowed money from distant relatives to pay off their loan debts, and they filed a police report against David, but no one really believed it would work. Kiara started seeing a therapist, supposedly devastated, crushed, and broken not only by David's betrayal, but also by my departure from my family. I didn't feel anything. No gloating, no sadness, not even a fleeting regret. Maybe it makes me cold, callous, but after months, if not years, of humiliation, after lying, being ignored, after bruises on my body and cracks in my soul, I just couldn't empathize with them anymore. One evening, over dinner with Vanessa, the same friend who sheltered me on that terrible night of my escape, the conversation, as always, touched on the past, but this time she asked the question I had been waiting for, but which, secretly, I was still afraid of. "Do you think you'll ever make up?" she asked softly, avoiding a direct look. "They're your family, after all." I took a sip of wine, held the glass in my hand, watching the light break through the ruby liquid. "I do not know," I said honestly. "I can't imagine that right now." "They didn't just make a mistake, Vanessa. They saw it. You saw my bruises, you heard my words. They knew what he was doing to me. And they chose him anyway." When I walked home that evening, I felt lighter than I had in years. For so long, I had been carrying the weight of my family's needs, their expectations, their problems, their reproaches, their voices ringing in my head even when they were silent, and now that that weight was gone, when it finally slipped off my shoulders, I felt not just relief, but a strange and almost unusual feeling of freedom, as if she had learned anew to breathe deeply, responsible only for herself and only for her life, not someone else's, not the imposed role of a savior, comforter, helper, but her own, honest, pure, and unencumbered. 3 months have passed since that last, devastating and liberating phone conversation with my mother. 3 months of silence, 3 months without tears, without explanations, without new wounds. Autumn came, brought coolness, transparency of the air and the smell of variability, and, surprisingly, my life gradually entered a steady, almost meditative rhythm where there was no place for chaos. Work, exercise, dinners with friends, leisurely walks along streets decorated with fallen leaves, Sunday readings, long conversations in the kitchen under the soft light of a lamp. I even allowed myself to start dating again, nothing serious, just coffee, just dinners with interesting men who had kind eyes and a light laugh, those who wasn't trying to break me or fix me, but was just there for me, leaving a space in which I wanted to breathe. Last week, I was promoted. Now I'm the senior director of Davidating, the ironic name of the department responsible for the most difficult negotiations. Ironic because I could hear his name in every word. A reminder turned into a force, and this promotion gave me not only a significant salary increase, but also my own office with windows on the park. I celebrated this event in silence, without fireworks, just by buying myself a pair of ridiculously expensive shoes that I had been looking after for several months. Previously, such money would have gone to a new water heater for my parents or to pay off Kiara's next credit card debt, but not now, no more. I still hear about my family, not because I'm looking for news, but because my cousin Jamie is still calling, carefully, respecting my boundaries, not insisting, just to keep me informed, like a messenger from the world I came from. Dad, she says, had a blood pressure increase. Nothing critical, but now he's taking pills. Mom took more shifts at the library to pay off debts. Kiara moved out of her apartment and moved back in with them, didn't pay the rent after the breakup. They didn't talk about it directly, but I knew that her life has now crumbled like a house of cards. The most important thing is that the police investigation against David ended in nothing. He disappeared as if he had never been, with a new lover, perhaps in another state or even a country, without using anything that could give him away. No cards, no names, no phones. The bank refused to cover the write-offs. The parents themselves violated all the rules by writing down PIN codes and leaving wallets in plain sight. Your mom asked if you changed your number, Jamie said in the last conversation, and I didn't hesitate to answer, no, I just don't answer. Jamie paused, as if choosing her words, and then, as if she had found a fragile bridge between us, she added, Kiara had a hard time. She was diagnosed with depression. I felt a brief flicker of sympathy, instantaneous like a gust of wind, but it immediately faded away, crushed by the weight of memories, of how Kiara looked at me with mockery, with victory, with cold condescension, announcing her engagement to David, as if I were a past worth forgetting. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I really felt regret, not gloating, not joy, but pure, detached sadness for the person who could have been close to me, but made a different choice. But I'm not ready to be around, I added quietly. I understand, Jamie sighed. They've ruined everything. Yes, I agreed. They did it. After that call, I sat on my balcony for a long time, in a plaid, with a glass of wine, watching the city lights blink, as the streets dissolve into soft twilight, as evening slowly slides onto the roof of the neighboring house. And then, for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to doubt. Maybe I'm too harsh, too unforgiving, maybe I should be given a second chance. Isn't that what family is for? But then I remembered the look on my mother's face when, looking at my bruises, she said that I was exaggerating everything, that I was emotional, that I was looking for an excuse to escape. I remembered my father sitting next to me, mute as a stone, not saying a word, not getting up, not hugging. I remembered the poisonous messages from Kiara, her posts full of lies, and realized, no, I wasn't being too harsh. I just finally loved myself enough to set boundaries. My therapist, yes, I started going to her almost immediately after everything that happened, says it's an act of self-love. You don't cut them off out of revenge, she told me, looking calm and firm. You're protecting yourself from people who have already shown that they will not take care of your well-being. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had really gone on that vacation to Florida, as I originally planned, if I hadn't allowed doubts and inner tension, this viscous premonition of trouble, to paralyze myself and stop at the very last moment, because then, perhaps, David would have shown his true face not just for me, but for the whole family, and maybe, finally, one of them would have seen what was hidden behind his courteous smile, polite voice, and eternal charm, maybe my mother. Would have caught the look he cast at me when he thought no one was watching, or I would have heard that icy note of control in his voice that I so often recognized and made my chest feel cold, and maybe then the truth would have come out like a quick and painful wound tearing the flesh of a lie, or vice versa. I would have spent 2 weeks pretending that everything was okay, choking with inner panic, barely holding back tears, with my face frozen in a constant smile, like in a bad family photo. And they would still justify him, defend him, accusing me of being overly sensitive, of dramatizing, of making up stories. I'll never know how it could have been, and to be honest, I'm glad I canceled those reservations. Then, for no apparent reason, almost impulsively, but there was something intuitive about this decision, as if my soul knew in advance that I couldn't go there, and now I think that it was probably the best decision I could have made in a long time. Yesterday I received a letter, a real paper letter, handwritten, with a local postmark and a familiar handwriting that took my breath away, because I immediately recognized it, neat, with slight inclines, as if written by a teacher on a blackboard, my mother's handwriting. My first thought was to throw it away without opening it, without reading it, to save myself from the risk of drowning again in pain, in doubts, in hope, which I so diligently burned out of myself. But no matter how hard I tried, I was still curious, and now I'm sitting at the kitchen table, carefully cutting open the envelope with a knife, as if I were opening a time capsule sealed in the past. Dear Aurora, the letter began, I don't know if you'll read this, but I had to try again. 4 pages, front and back, were written in a smooth, nervous handwriting, which showed an attempt to control himself. She wrote about how they were wrong, how they didn't see the obvious, how they were blinded and didn't want to hear how David slowly and methodically isolated Chiara from friends, from family, from me, how he filled her head with poison, driving a wedge between us, how he searched for any cracks and widened them until everything was over. It didn't crack. She wrote that after he left them at the hotel without warning, they found a bag of pills in his bedside table, which they did not even know about. We should have believed you, she wrote. There is no excuse for what we did. We betrayed you in the most terrible way, and we live with it every day. There were no requests in the letter, neither for money, nor for help, nor even for forgiveness. She just asked if I could ever talk to her, at least once, and put my new mobile phone number at the very bottom of the last page. I slowly folded the letter, returned it to the envelope, and carefully put it in my desk drawer, not because I'd forgotten, not because it meant nothing, but because I just wasn't ready to make decisions. This morning, I woke up to my rhythm, made myself a coffee, scrolled through the calendar of meetings, lunch with Vanessa, a presentation for a client, dinner with Alex, a man I had been dating for several weeks, not feeling violent feelings for him, but appreciating the ease with which he entered my life without demanding nothing beyond what I'm willing to give. I went out on the balcony, breathed in the fresh air, and watching the sky slowly turn peach pink and fiery orange, I thought that I didn't feel happy as it is usually described. There was no euphoria, no inner triumph, but there was something more important: satisfaction, peace, the feeling that I finally in its place. I still felt sad, not for what I had lost, but rather for what I had never had, a family that would choose me, that would stand up for me, that would believe in me. Parents who can protect, a sister who can hear. But now I realized that I didn't need it to be whole. I built my life. I had friends who didn't expect sacrifices from me, who respected my boundaries. I had a job where I felt valued. I had a home where I felt safe. I freed myself from the responsibility of being a savior, someone who constantly stretches out her arm, even when she is drowning. Will I ever call the number my mom left? Maybe. But not today. Probably not tomorrow. Maybe not for months, maybe even years. I'm not angry anymore, not with the rage that burns from the inside, not with the rage that screams and vomits. That's progress, I guess. But I'm still not ready to let them back into my life. Because trust, once so thoroughly destroyed, cannot be easily restored, just as you cannot fix a mirror that has been broken into 1,000 pieces by simply squeezing it in your palms. And I'm not sure if I want to make the effort to pick up the pieces without cutting my hands again. Right now, I'm focused on myself, on healing, on building real connections, with those who see value in me, who believe, who don't undermine, but support. Maybe one day, I'll be ready to hear my mother's apologies, maybe to look Chiara in the eye without anger, to see more than silence in my father. But if it happens, it will be on my terms. Because I am no longer someone's family, not a bank, not a savior. I am Aurora. And for the first time in a long time, that's enough. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.